Hello all. The default position in law is that the UK leaves the EU on the 31st of October with or without a deal. MPs opposed to no deal want to pass a new law to change that. From Mish Shedlock at Mish Talk, somebody I read regularly, he says, the Remainers are huffing and puffing this morning, but it will be to no avail. Johnson's strategy is nearly foolproof. Let's have a look and see if we can break this down a little bit. He says, Jeremy Corbyn says he will try to politically stop prorogation with legislation. But how might this happen? First, opposition leaders have demanded that Boris Johnson either reverse his decision to suspend Parliament or put it to a Commons vote. The leaders of Labour, the SNP, the Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, the Independent Group for Change and the Greens condemn the undemocratic actions of Boris Johnson following his suspension of Parliament until 14th of October. Mish says, so what? Has got a point. They're demanding that Boris Johnson suspend Parliament or put it to reverse his decision to suspend Parliament or put it to a Commons vote. Okay, they're demanding, are they? Number 2, Lord Young quit as a government whip in the House of Lords over Boris Johnson's decision, saying it risks undermining the fundamental role of Parliament in his resignation letter. Mish says, excellent news. Johnson will appoint a whip who will obey his wishes. Should the Commons pull any legislative tricks that require the House of Lords, expect a filibuster. A filibuster. Okay. Paul Withers in the Express says a filibuster is a political procedure used where one or more members of Parliament debate over a proposed piece of legislation in order to delay or entirely prevent a decision being made on it. So essentially, blocking up that time or continue to make arguments about anything that comes up just to stop it going over that finishing line. However, as Paul Withers of the Express reports, former Justice Secretary Lord Falconer warned any attempt to use filibustering would be instantly rejected with little bother. He told the Daily Telegraph have the means to stop a filibuster. We've never used it before, but we also have never been confronted with such a contemptuous action by a Prime Minister in modern times. Any attempt by the government to filibuster would be knocked back by the Lords with very little difficulty. All right, back to Mish. Mish says, the Labour leader has said Parliament will legislate rapidly on Tuesday when it resumes, preventing Boris Johnson from suspended Parliament and stopping a no-deal Brexit. Mish says, that's not legally binding. Let's have a look at this. In the Express, Rachel Russell's writing, Jeremy Corbyn has teamed up with Rebel MPs to draw plans for Parliament to sit next weekend in a bid to quickly pass legislation needed to force Boris Johnson to request an extension of Article 50. MPs will return to Westminster on Tuesday, with Parliament then being prorogued at some point in the following week until 14th of October. A senior Tory rebel said that the plan is to take total control of the order paper on Wednesday to push through the legislation to seal, according to the Times. This could force the government to delay both Mr Johnson's first Prime Minister's questions and the spending review. Conservative MP Oliver Letwin is said to be drafting legislation with clerks, so MPs to take over the Commons order paper before Parliament's return next week. Well then, excuse me. So, are we talking about a Brexit extension request here? Let's have a think about this. If this does pass, it could force the government to request another extension from the EU. This would not be easy, though, because the calendar in the House of Commons is controlled by the government. Well, another option for rebel MPs is emergency debates, which are granted by the Speaker, John Bercow, who could play a crucial role in the next few months. But even if they succeeded in passing legislation, there's no guarantee that the government would even act on it. The government could ignore the new law and not make the Brexit extension request. This, though, would probably end up in court. Then there's something else. The government could make an extension request, but then refuse to accept any terms the EU sets for the Brexit extension. The government could then argue it had complied with the law, but the UK would still leave on the 31st of October. Okay, back to Mish. A petition calling on the government not to prorogue Parliament has already been signed by more than 1.4 million people. The petition is growing even faster than the petition to revoke Article 50, which eventually had 6 million signatures. Mish says that's not legally binding. True. Continue with this article. A bit of common sense from Eurointelligence. Note, I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but just some of the more interesting points. So, Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings have a strategy, and nobody else does. The prorogation plan is devious, or clever, depending on your views. It tells us that this government will stop at nothing to frustrate the Remainers in the Parliament, so long as it is legal. The decision to prorogue Parliament in the way that they did dramatically reduces the options for Remain supporters. There is now no time for legislation to force the government to extend Brexit. There is little more than a week after the Parliament convenes next week, and there will be a couple of weeks after the Queen's speech in October the 14th. Can this be stopped legally? Not really. It's not the Prime Minister who has prorogued the Parliament. It was the Queen who had her own legal counsel. Aside from that, it has been reported that John Major has stated they're not going to try and argue that the Queen has done anything illegal here, but that the advice given to her by the Prime Minister could be challenged. So they're not going to challenge the Queen in her prorogation. They're going to challenge the advice given by the Prime Minister to her. Continuing with this from Eurointelligence, there is no way the House of Commons and Lords will finalise an anti-Brexit law before Parliament breaks up. They would have to retable the legislation in mid-October. But at that time, Johnson and EU leaders would be in last-minute negotiations. If the talks succeed, Parliament will get a last-minute take it or leave it vote. And then there's still one option left for Remainers to pursue, but it is very risky. We'll talk about more of this in a minute. They could hold a vote of no confidence when they come back next week. If they win, the Fixed Term Parliaments Act sets out a definitive procedure. The House of Commons has 2 weeks to secure a majority in support of another Prime Minister, a technical government, as the Italians would call it. But this is unlikely as the opposition is hopelessly divided on this point. If that effort fails, the Commons would be suspended for new elections. But crucially, it is God that sets the date for them. Number 10 yesterday said that the dates for elections would be November the 1st to the 5th. That is after the no-deal Brexit. In other words, a no-confidence motion could actually trigger a no-deal Brexit, as the Commons would have deprived themselves of the opportunity to ratify a withdrawal agreement. This is why the timing of the prorogation is so clever, they say at Eurointelligence. No doubt the work of Dominic Cummings. The political reality is that the anti-Brexit campaign has committed one strategic blunder after another and failed to attract enough support. They lost 2 general elections, 1 European election and 1 referendum. The ferocity of their reaction is best explained as a sudden realisation that they lost. They did not see this coming. Sorry, a little bit of technical difficulty there, but we will continue. Just a few more things to go over. So, Ian Watson, BBC News, 27th of August. Another way of potentially stopping a no deal is to try and bring down the Johnson government via a no confidence vote. Mr. Corbyn has said that this was his preferred option, after which he would become interim PM, call a snap election and campaign for another referendum. However, the Liberal Democrats and some Tory MPs said they would not support any plan that saw Mr. Corbyn become Prime Minister, even on a temporary basis. Lib Dem leader Joe Swinson has said a no-confidence vote remains a last resort, if you like, to be able to enforce the will of Parliament, but the main proposal is going down the legislative route. Okay, so if they do get a majority in this, formal process begins. We then have 14 calendar days, which allows the Prime Minister to either prove he holds the confidence of the Parliament, or at the same time, if another MP can prove that they have the support of a majority of MPs, the current Prime Minister is expected to give way. If no government has been formed after 14 days, a general election will be triggered. This would then take at least 5 weeks. So again, it comes down to timing, guys. Now, I'm just going to go through a few things. Next thing, Jeff Taylor, his YouTube channel, a fantastic watch. I'll tell you what he said. The Conservative Party are riding high in the polls, benefiting from the Boris Brexit wave. The a recent YouGov poll puts him at a double-digit lead for the Conservative parties. This will keep Boris Johnson and his Tory party happy, and the Lib Dems will be pleased at their bit of a comeback. But Jeremy Corbyn will not be happy with the Labour Party's showing, and more importantly, nor will his supporters. By now, with the Tories having been in power for nigh on a decade, Labour should be doing better than this, and they should not have the Lib Dems snapping at their heels either. In that YouGov poll, they asked further questions. How many people would support a government of national unity? 41% said they would support it, 43% said they wouldn't. In an additional question, should the government be forced to seek an extension to Article 50? 41% support it, 42% against. Now, I don't want to go into all the figures. Go check out Jeff Taylor on his YouTube channel and support what he does. You will be glad that you did. I've learned so much about Brexit from this gentleman. Big up to Jeff Taylor. Okay. Now we have early reports from The Independent that 50 cross-party MPs have vowed to sit in an alternative House of Commons if Boris Johnson suspends Parliament ahead of the Brexit deadline. This, along with more than 60 planned protests, should make for interesting news in the coming weeks. I'll try to keep you updated as we go along, guys. Thank you very much for your time. Like and subscribe and comment if you appreciate what